Hi friends, welcome back to the Bright Side of You podcast presented by Beyond Skin Aesthetics. Today's episode is a unique one. It's a topic that we have not covered on the podcast yet, but it was introduced on the podcast. So this episode's inspiration really came from one of your Q&A questions. I was asked last summer on an episode with a friend how I am protecting my son virtually with the photos that I'm sharing, with the information that I'm sharing about him, and all of the things. And that sparked inspiration to reach out to my friend, Alisha Merlo, whose passion is the fight against human trafficking. And so I reached out to her. She got on Google, found somebody local here in Columbus, Ohio that is championing this effort as well. And we reached out, got them here in studio with us today too. So all that to be said, I am actually the learner today. I am taking all of this in right alongside of you. If you're tuning in on YouTube, hello. If you're listening in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else, then I hope that you have a tissue in hand possibly, because we do not know where this conversation is going to go. It's going to be heavy in topic, but light in the fact that we are going to give you tangible things that you can apply today in your daily life and every day moving forward. Thank you so much for tuning in. And without further ado, welcome to my guest, Iris from Grace Haven. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Alisha Merlo, my dear friend, welcome. I'm so glad you're here in studio today.
This is very exciting. Number one, because I am in studio with you, but number two, because we are talking about a very important topic that is not exclusive to one area of work, but really does touch on our lives at home, in business, and in our community. So thank you so much for bringing a voice to this conversation, Delaney. It's important.
Alisha, I'm so glad that you're here today in Ohio. I know your heart, but I would love for you to share a little bit about why you are here. And I reached out to you as the topic expert in my life on anti-human trafficking efforts.
Absolutely. And I'd love to be able to share how we first got connected, because my day job, although one day I may be called into this type of work, is in the aesthetics industry. I am the vice president of professional relations at Colorescience, which is how we connected. So by day, that's what I get to do. I don't even say I have to do it, because I love it, because it's a space that I've been in for almost 3 decades, which is crazy to say, and such an honor and a joy. However, about 6 years ago, when we were all in a certain time, we call that the 2020 season, I was really seeking other ways to have purpose and meaning. And thinking about, if I left this earth today and God called me to heaven, what legacy would I have left? Mm-hmm. And that was my prayer. And God's answer to that was human trafficking. And I had no idea what human trafficking really was at that time. I had done one walk with an organization called A21. Iris, you may be familiar with them. They're a global organization. And I researched a little bit about what human trafficking was. So I love that you're taking this first step, as you had said, to learn more. And when I first learned what human trafficking was, and not just what it was, but the scope and scale of it, I like to say I was shattered. And I was having nightmares. And I didn't know where I was going to be headed or led in this direction, because you said it's a heavy topic. And I remember saying, God, I don't know what you want me to do with this, but I don't know if I can handle it. And this was what I heard in response. Alisha, you can use those tears and cry in the corner and nothing will change, or you can use those tears to fuel the fire to make a difference. And from then on out, I said, okay. And my motto in life is, anytime somebody offers you to do something that you've not done before, what do we say, Delaney?
Yes.
We say yes. So I said yes. And so I got connected locally in my area, and was able to put together a local awareness and community event that was called the Stop Traffic Walk in North County, San Diego, where we hosted that walk 2 years in a row. I'd never done a walk before. I just said yes. And we're able to have hundreds and hundreds of community members get educated, invite business owners like yourself and other areas of business who had a heart to make a difference, and experts like Iris to help educate and empower us with knowledge and wisdom. And we raised over $130,000 for survivor programs on human trafficking. And from there, I was hooked. I was like, I want to make a difference. And yes, these things have to be funded. But from there on out, I was like, well, how can I use the gifts that I've been given and the sphere of influence I've been given to do more? And so for there, it expanded. And as I like to say, God gave me an empty paper plate and he began to fill it. And so now I lead an outreach through the Coastline Dream Center, North County, San Diego, called the Stop Trafficking team. And we are two-pillared. We educate the community, again, inviting experts like Iris, law enforcement, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about their role in this story, as well as what we call lived experience experts, which are survivors of human trafficking, because it's their story, not ours to tell, to learn more about it in our community. And then we also serve locally 2 survivor programs that are wonderful programs that help women get out who have gotten out of the life of trafficking, be redeemed and renewed and restored. So I lead that. I'm a committee member for the Churches Against Trafficking. That's another thing I've done. See, this paper plate's getting very full. Yeah. And then finally, I have been blessed to find a way to marry what I get to do in my day job that I love so much in the aesthetic industry with trafficking through ASLMS, which is the American Society of Laser Medicine. I want to get to that later because I think it's a really cool story. So maybe we can talk about that further in the podcast about when we talk about what we can do. So that's how I got involved. And once I am involved in something, I'm all in. I'm all in, and I'm not all in by myself. I want others to listen and learn alongside me and be a part of the conversation and help them be a part of the solution. So that's a little bit of the story.
I call you a master connector and recruiter because you find the best people for the job and you get them fully on board and passionate about where your heart is at, but you make it their heart as well. And it's in such a organic and authentic way where you're just showing your passion and it's infectious and it really does spread. So I'm so happy to have you here and a part of this conversation today.
And to that point, you'd asked also how we got to be here and have Iris here. Yeah. And as you said in the beginning of why we're even having this conversation, how your listeners actually started asking you about what you do personally with your son. Yep. And I think it's so important to understand that those of us who are serving in this area or have an interest or a heart to learn more, we as citizens of the world can have these conversations with our peers, with our families, with those in our community. But when we bring in experts like Iris to be able to help us to understand more, it's not one voice in this conversation. And I want to add to the story because this is the heart and the emotion behind it about how Grace Haven became a part of this podcast. Is we were talking and I shared with Delaney, we need to have somebody else. Like I'll talk all day long, but it's not just my voice. I represent a particular party in this conversation, but not the only voice. And I'm on my computer, Googling as we look, human trafficking survivor programs, Columbus, Ohio. Well, first pops up Grace Haven. So I click it while we're still talking, gabbing along all this, we can multitask. Yep. And what I thought was so all of a sudden, I don't know if you remember, I caught my breath and I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, there's a program in Columbus and they serve children who have been impacted by trafficking. And it's very rare, this work. The need is great, but the workers are few. There's not a lot of resources for youth. There's few resources for adults if you look at the scope and scale and the need out there. But when I saw that there was something in your own backyard that was serving children who is a population that just doesn't get a lot of resources, I was like, this is it. And I'm so grateful that you have brought us all together and what we're all going to learn together and help your listeners who are so passionate about making a difference to be a part of the conversation and a part of the solution. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that in today's world, we have our eyes open to what's going on around us, but we all don't necessarily know even the severity of what's going on around us, how close to home it is. And we all just want to do something, but we don't know what that something is. And we don't know how to even get started. I would love for the conversation to really flow all over it so that we can leave with what are those tangible things and a little bit more knowledge of what's going on around us, but also a lightness. So I would love to start with Iris. Can you tell us a little bit about Grace Haven, what you're doing at Grace Haven, and the mission behind it?
Yeah, so Grace Haven is actually a faith-based nonprofit here in Ohio, and we serve youth and their families all throughout 88 counties of Ohio. So we are statewide. Our goal is to provide services and bridge the gap in areas that are missing within a youth's life. So we primarily work with youth who have experienced human trafficking, whether it is labor or sex trafficking, or youth who are in vulnerable positions in life, who are at risk of being exploited, which, can lead into human trafficking. But we also offer other services for youth as well. So we primarily work within the age range of 11 to 19-year-old youth. And so a lot of times people think that because we primarily specialize in serving that specific population, in reality, we also do provide the services for kids. We call it early intervention. So when we see that a youth is struggling, or maybe a youth has experienced abuse, or they're in an unhealthy relationship dynamic that may have, started out great, but then there are signs of control, there's abuse. We, want to be able to intervene. We want to be able to provide a space for them to be able to learn what is a healthy relationship, or we want them to be able to come to those conclusions on their own as well. So it's really a very highly relational model. So we do have case management services for kids in the community, and that's one-on-one. So a case manager will go to wherever the youth is in the community. So we have offices in Upper Arlington, Dayton, and Toledo, but kids don't have to worry about having to come to us for services and to meet with someone. Our case managers will go to where they are. And so that also includes youth who are incarcerated. We want to be able to provide them the services that they need as well, because we want to make sure that they are able to equip them and provide them the resources needed for when they are, no longer incarcerated. We want to be able to not just educate them and provide the resources, but to really give them hope and empower them to know that they can thrive, that they can have goals, and that, they can have a fulfilling life. And so we want to be able to, instill that within them. So there are the 3 levels to our organization. The one of them is the group home. So we have a safe house for girls ages 12 to 18, and they have 24/7 wraparound services. So we have, first, second, third shift staff. They live on campus. So it's kind of like a compound, and their school is also on campus. So we're contracted with a private prep school. The teachers will come on campus and they work with each girl individually, developing an individualized education plan. So, unfortunately, some of our youth are not able to keep up with their studies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you will have kids that have, oh my God, sometimes you will have kids that they have all the things that they need, and in terms of meeting their educational goals, so they don't fall behind in school. But then, there are some that do fall behind and they're not able to be at par with their peers. So, and because we have a wide range sometimes of age gaps between the girls, staff works with them individually. So there's, they have math tutors, they're able to also have their services. So we also provide transportation for medical appointments, for outings, everything for them is structured, it's scheduled. And then they also have what we call dialectal behavioral therapy. So, that's every week. They learn about processing their emotions, trauma. So they're learning coping skills as well. And then they also, they're provided with psychoeducation. So this is the part where they're learning about human trafficking and they're learning about the different topics related to trafficking. And so a lot of times youth that come to us, they don't realize that they have been exploited or that they have had that they have experienced human trafficking. So they'll say like, oh, well, so-and-so told me like I'm here because I was a victim of this. Like, I'm not a victim. That didn't happen to me, And so as we kind of break down the content and as we kind of go into these different sectors and topics, they then start to kind of connect the dots of their own experiences where they're like, oh, that did happen to me. Or like, yeah, like I experienced that, or, I did that, or I saw these things. And, they're slowly learning on their own of what it is that their experience is. And that's very important because we've seen girls who have then learned to advocate for themselves, and they've learned to find their voice and really like speak up on the topic itself as well. Like, so we've had some of our survivors kind of go over the edge which is one of our yearly fundraisers for Grace Haven. But basically, they rappel from a skyscraper. That is going over the edge. And so we've had some survivors go over the edge who were like in our group home. And so, they're like, this is a very important like topic and a very important matter. And so that's always a very special moment to see as well. And then of course I kind of touched up on case management. And that also involves our clinical service team as well, because they work hand in hand. So any youth that is referred to us, whether for a group home or for community services, there's an intake process. Basically, they're meeting with a clinician and a case manager that will be assigned to them. And this helps us know more about the youth, right? Because our plans for the youth are very individualized. They're not cookie cutter, because every youth is different. Every youth is unique, and trafficking is also unique in how it impacts an individual. And so we never want to just have someone put someone into a specific mold. We want to be able to learn as much as possible about the youth in order to know how to help them. And of course, like during that intake process, if a youth doesn't feel comfortable with, certain questions, we don't pressure them. And also we try to find the information that we need, like if they were referred to us by their probation officer or a counselor, we follow up with them. We ask them questions if it's not something that's already documented, because we also don't want to re-traumatize a youth by having to ask repetitive questions, especially like if they've already disclosed about this a specific topic. And so again, it's very individualized. And then we have our education. So that's what I do. I'm a interdisciplinary team coordinator and a network advocate. I started out and like working a shift in the group home when I first started out. And then I did a little bit of case management and education, and now I solely do the education piece. But our department focuses on the education, awareness, and early intervention. So we're out in the community. We are building relationships with other like-minded partners. And because at the same time, we want to be able to have those resources. Like we would love to help all youth, but sometimes if we're not equipped in a certain area, we want to make sure that we have a trusted partner within the community that we can bring into the youth's circle of, their team, so that they can provide those resources adequately for them. My other part of the job is that training and education piece for youth. So I will go into schools and I will talk to kids about the realities associated with human trafficking. And we work very closely with the task force, with DYS, with our state partners, to also bring training to the adults, not just parents, but adults in various professions, because again, trafficking is everywhere. Like it's not in just one specific sector of society. And so we want to be able to equip the adults in our community about what is going on within their communities and what's going on in their children's lives.
When I think of human trafficking, in my naive mind and experience, I think of getting snatched at a truck stop and basically being thrown into sex slavery in a way, but it's so much more than that. What is human trafficking?
Yeah, so a lot of times that is what people do think that human trafficking is, especially when we think of like, oh, in other countries, other parts of the world, it is very much in your face. Whereas domestically here in the US, it's in your face. It's more in plain sight. It's like hidden in plain sight. Think of like people who enter like the witness protection, like, you know, like they are there every day and people just don't realize that, oh, like this person, you know, like is in a program, or so they kind of feel like it's kind of the same mentality that some people have when it comes to those who are currently within that lifestyle of trafficking, that are actively being trafficked, especially with kids. You know, they're not like in some corner of society or in your community. It's like they go to school, you know, they play sports, they have friends. Some of them love school, some of them excel at school, just as much as you have the kids who struggle at school, or, you know, they are withdrawn, or they don't have a lot of friends, or they have, you know, a rough home life. So a lot of times when I ask kids, like, what do you think of like human trafficking? What comes to mind? They'll say like, the movie Taken, a white van. You know, I'll ask them like, you know, who do you think a trafficker is? You know, male, female, or who is a trafficking victim, a boy or girl, you know, and oftentimes it's like, it's an old man in a white van and it only happens to like little girls. And it's like, well, it's more, there's more to it than that. So the first biggest misconception is that people think human trafficking is that stranger danger piece. Are there cases where there is kidnapping and that is stranger danger? Yes, those do exist, right? We see more of that reported in social media. Well, we have in the past, you know, more stories are being reported on where it's like, oh, like this wasn't a stranger, this was someone the person knew. Right. But yeah, that makes up a small percentage. The higher percentage is someone that the victim does know. And human trafficking is the exploitation and the abuse of a person through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, whether it is for labor or commercial sex or other services. So, you know, coercion is that blackmail piece, taking advantage of someone's vulnerabilities, making someone feel threatened, like they don't have, like it's not a choice. And then, of course, there's the physical aspect, and then fraud, pretending to be someone that they're not, and, you know, coming off as someone that cares about the victim. In this particular, like I work with youth, so I'm like with the youth in particular, and making false promises. So when it comes to who traffickers are, anybody can be a trafficker, whether it's a teacher, a parent. There are the top 3 categories for traffickers are, in terms of who perpetrates, are family members, friends of family, significant others. And so there is a lot of familial trafficking that occurs. And we do have a lot of familial trafficking that occurs here in Ohio as well, in like very rural parts. And there's also a thing of generational familial trafficking, where it's literally, you know, we've had cases where the youth is being trafficked, but then we learn, oh, the parent, the person that's trafficking them, was trafficked themselves by another family member. And so when those certain behaviors are normalized within a home, within a child's immediate atmosphere, they're a child, right? Like they're exposed to it, but they're being taught that that is normal and that it's okay, and it's not. And females can be traffickers as well. It's not just males. I will always tell kids, don't just focus on, oh, this one person or this, you know, one gender or sex. It's really anybody can be a trafficker. Anybody can be a predatory individual. Also, I would say when kids reference the movie Taken, which I've seen, and if people haven't seen it, it's like it's an older movie, but it's basically, you know, Liam Neeson, he plays a dad who like is ex-special forces, and his daughter goes overseas with a friend, and then they're, kidnapped, sold into a sex ring, and then he goes overseas and like uses his skills to save her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I will point out is that in that movie, there's a scene where the girls are actually in France at the airport, and they end up striking a conversation with these two guys. And as they're talking, they're saying, "Oh, we're Americans. We're here on vacation. We're staying at, her parents' house, and we have the whole place to ourselves." Right. So it's like small talk. And then because they're waiting to get a taxi to go to their place. And then the taxi comes and they end up actually sharing a ride with those two guys. And the girls are dropped off first. So in the next scene, when the people are breaking into the home, we see that the two men from the airport are there. So one of the biggest things that I tell kids is that once you entertain a conversation with anybody, they're no longer a stranger. Whether it's someone that you meet in store or you're waiting for the bus, they're no longer a stranger. And that also counts for people that they may interact with online. A lot of times kids are like, well, this is my friend. I know them through online. Like, we don't know each other in person. And so they think that because they don't have this physical place within their life, that technically they're still a stranger. And I'm like, no, that's not a stranger. That's somebody that you do know. And a lot of times there is that misconception that trafficking is always violent, and it's not always violent, because traffickers are good at what they do, and they're very charismatic people. And oftentimes they are people who are in positions of authority, in positions where they have access to potential victims. And so their whole thing is to make their victims feel as though they are a trustworthy person, they care about them, and then, they use that to establish trust, gain more information on them, on the individual themselves, and use that information to manipulate and eventually kind of either isolate or control the victim, right? And so now through this, they've like developed trauma bond, where it's, again, normalizing or rationalizing behaviors that are not healthy or safe. So a lot of times I will ask kids, like, do you know any toxic like couples in your school, or like toxic friend groups? And they're like, yeah. And it's like, okay, like think about like, what about them you think is toxic, that is unhealthy? Yeah. Well, like, what would you identify? Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, they like curse each other out, or like, when they're not together, they talk bad about each other, but then they get back together. Like, they break up a lot, they get back together a lot. And I'm like, okay, it's kind of like trying to pull two magnets apart, and then it's like that force that just kind of brings them back together. And it's like, that is what trauma bond is. It normalizes the abusive behaviors, and you yourself will try to justify and kind of rationalize, like, well, I know that they've hurt me, but like they've been there for me. Or I know that, they may have said these things and it hurt me, but they apologized. They said they were sorry, right? But they keep doing that, right? They're sorry, they apologize, there's gifts, I won't do it again. And then the cycle kind of continues again, right? And so a lot of times that verbal piece of manipulation and coercion is also a form of, kind of making someone do things and accepting certain behaviors that they wouldn't have normally accepted otherwise, but they've been conditioned, they've been groomed to accept that behavior and kind of think that, oh, like this is normal, this is okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate what Iris is sharing here, because when I was first learning about trafficking, and I gave you the picture, which was a very real picture of my first experience, was like being shattered and shocked that how could a person force somebody to do something like this? And then also, how could a person actually contribute to the demand for something like this? And in my research and understanding, and I'm so glad that Iris talked about what trafficking is, right? It's actually forcing somebody through a method of intimidation, coercion, threats, violence, manipulation to do something they wouldn't normally do, that actually only benefits the person that's actually exploiting the victim. And so that's a whole mind shift of understanding. And then I had to understand that prostitution, which seems like, and people often say is the oldest profession, is human trafficking in many instances. Very few people that are adults, but children are also put in the prostitution category when they're forced to be out on the streets or walk the streets. We see that a lot in my neck of the woods in California. There's specific areas that are dedicated. So minors are actually being, into forced prostitution. And getting a mind shift and understanding that exploitation is a key factor to this. Somebody's being exploited really drove it home to me that this is a true crime. And I think criminalization of those who are perpetrating this is a big piece. And we'll probably talk about solutions and ideas and being aware. But when I was learning, here's a shocking thing that I learned, that we sit here and we were like listening to Iris and learning these things about what this truly does to somebody's spirit, their soul, their body. This was not a crime as deemed by the United Nations until the year 2000 in my research. And again, when you start digging into facts and statistics, your audience is very evidence-based, Delaney. If we're in medicine, we like evidence, we like numbers to be able to like really support what we're understanding and learning about. So that was a huge eye-opening thing. This wasn't even considered a crime globally until just 26 years ago. So 20 years for me when I got into this. And then the fact she talks about, you don't know if somebody is being exploited or not, because they're not always being put out on the street. But also 1 in 4, I believe is the statistic I was at, that's a child. 1 in 4 victims of human trafficking is a minor.
Yeah. What does that look like in our daily lives? I think even still, it can seem like, oh yeah, we'd be able to identify that, but it just feels so far off. What does that look like with somebody walking down the street or coming into our offices when we think about bringing this into our industry specifically, going into a medical practice of some sort? How can we identify when this is going on?
That's a really good question because one of the things like that you said, Alicia, was kind of like when it comes to trafficking, like especially because we primarily work with minors, right? With under the umbrella of like sex trafficking, federal and state laws say that a youth, anyone under the age of 18, does not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion took place in order for it to be considered sex trafficking. Unlike labor trafficking, where because there are laws that allow youth to legally work in the U.S., a youth would have to prove some element of force, fraud, or coercion took place, right? So when we talk about especially the piece of like sex trafficking in youth, it's actually an element of commercial sex. So commercial sex is whenever someone exchanges sexual services for something of value, whether it's food, money, a place to stay, new clothes, new shoes, new hair, a backpack, a purse, or like school supplies, right? And so a lot of times youth who have engaged in commercial sex, who have exchanged sex for things that they need, because they sometimes kids will say, well, no one forced me. I'm not a victim. No one put a gun to my head. This is just what I do to survive. And it's really about like letting them know, like, well, even if you did choose to engage in it, like if there's an adult involved, it's automatically considered sex trafficking. And so when it comes to like, for me, when I'm in the classroom and I'm trying to teach kids of like, well, how does this look like in your daily life? Okay. Think of, it could be someone who maybe wears clothes that are outside of, what their family might be able to afford. Or there is this one story of like a youth where she was a girl and her mother was her trafficker. And her mother kind of sold like the experience to buyers because she went to a school where she needed to wear a uniform. And so she would actually have the buyers pick up the daughter from school, like after school. And so there would be different cars, different men, right? And so I bring that to say that the survivor, this young girl, like later on when she's like reflecting and sharing her story, she would say how like I knew that people saw this, like, and I also heard rumors, or I saw how people like looked at me and saw what was going on. So a lot of times it's when you see the behavior, question the behavior and don't label the child. So in her case, students, her peers were seeing like, oh, like all these guys pick her up. And so the rumors were like, oh, like I just, I date these older guys and I'm boy crazy and I always have a new boyfriend. And if somebody would have just been like, why is there like so many different guys? Or like, why is it a different car? Like, is there something going on? It could have, had someone raise the question. It could have brought up like, oh yeah, like actually let me pay attention to see what's going on. And then it could have gone into a conversation like, hey, like I saw, this person picked you up from school. Like I haven't seen them before. Like, is it your uncle? Or so kind of like engaging in that conversation of like, when you see something, say something. So it could be, I'm trying to think of like the
what about
everyday things.
online? Because I feel like that's the question and that's really where the conversation stemmed from, was how am I protecting my son who's now a year old and what I'm sharing online, whether that's the information of what he looks like, where he goes to school, what activities he likes, all these details about him that he's not sharing himself, how I'm protecting him or what my choice is and why. What do we see as something that may be online of a victim? And I guess second part of that, while you're telling us what that looks like, is what can we do to protect our children online?
That's a good question. Because with online, with social media, there's pros and cons. It is a whole new vast world, right? I did not grow up with technology. Like I had Facebook when I was like a senior in high school, and it's like
same.
I had MySpace, and it's a totally different world. And so, when you bring up the piece of like online safety, I think it's important to also bring up the element of like sextortion that occurs online. And so like especially platforms like Roblox, Minecraft, different gaming platforms where you have like younger kids who are playing there.
And you wouldn't think that a gaming platform would be a location either.
Even kids YouTube has like certain content that's very damaging, but because it's a cartoon or it's like bright colors or it's like very animated, because it looks that way, it doesn't mean that that's actually what's being like shared within that video content. But like YouTube is another area too, because you can still comment on other people's like comments within a video that you're watching, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, with the sextortion piece in social media, which sextortion can happen either online or in person, but primarily it is something where
it's virtually.
Individuals are posing as teenage girls, right? And so they're either hacking legitimate accounts, which already has the pictures and it kind of has everything in place for them. They just have to like hack it and they can use it. They can, look through the friends list and, click on profiles, see who is private or public, and they can send a direct message, right? And so with sextortion, there's two elements to it. There's sexually motivated and financially motivated. So there was an example of this is a young boy from Olentangy, Ohio, Braden Marcus. Braden's Law is actually named after him because Braden was a victim of sextortion. And basically he was contacted by somebody online. It was a girl. He thought it was a girl. They began to talk, and then they moved the perpetrator moved the conversation to another app. And then through that app continued talking. They initiated by sending a nude photo of themselves, right? And then to kind of make Braden feel like, oh, okay, like they did it. So like it,
I'll do it too.
Mm-hmm. And then he sent the photo. And as soon as he did that, they flipped. Like it was like a switch night and day where like they were bullying him. They were harassing him, pay us $1,800 or we're going to put your images out there. And, he tried to reason with them and it did not work, and unfortunately he took his life as a result of that.
And Alisha actually shared a statistic with me of the amount of time it takes when that happens. I'm putting you on the spot here. Do you remember what that
Seconds.
was?
To be contacted?
No,
Or
for it to escalate, the average time that it takes for somebody to take their life after that.
There have been cases, and Iris may know, and I can't name you the names being up on this, where it's in the same day.
Yeah. It's fast.
What I've learned about this sextortion piece, and I hosted an event through our Coastline Dream Center actually, and screened a film called Sextortion. It's out there. You can watch it. It actually is real case studies and follows as a documentary incidences of sextortion. But a lot of it is boys. The target is young men that are so easily lured into this. Because if you think about as human beings, what do we want? We want food, clothing, shelter, safety, and love.
Mm-hmm.
And when any of those is low or missing, there's a vulnerability there. And when it comes to online, what we all do this, we put ourselves online and we share those emotions because it's become a cultural norm to just kind of communicate it with our heart to hope that someone's going to hear us and feel us and know us and be seen.
And connect on the other side.
And those who are perpetrating nefarious things through online exploitation know that. And they're master manipulators, as Iris has already told us. They're very skilled in this. And so they get young people who really have grown up with this technology in their hands, and this is their social form of communication. And maybe they spent, from 2020 to 2022 having no social contact outside of being online. So this is part of the way they connect and communicate. And instantly, no stranger danger, a young person is putting their feelings out there or being very much out there online, engaging with the world, without parental controls and maybe in a public account, to where that it leaves them open for exploitation for people who understand how to work the system for this, for young people that are online. And we see this, and I talked to ICAC. So Iris mentioned earlier the task force. There's in many states, thank goodness, there is the Human Trafficking Task Force. And then internet crimes is a whole different division. So it's internet crimes against children. Is what ICAC stands for. So we work with them in San Diego. And so it's a whole other crime that's viewed because it's perpetrated across time and space and requires a different set of skills digitally to work with. So exploitation online, to get back to, is sextortion is a form. But you said something earlier, and you were like, well, I'm a mom. My son is a small child at this point in his life. I'm the one in control of what people are exposed to.
Right. I'm the one sharing
So I'm going to say
information.
that as a parent, you are the one in control of what you share about your personal life and your child. And you also, and many people in our amazing aesthetic industry have big social media profiles. You're public figures. So you're not going to be a private account. You're public figures because that's where
Our
your
job.
business is, and that's your job, and that's how you connect with the world. And there's nothing bad about that, but I think your heart to say, how do we protect our kids that maybe aren't the ones online?
Right.
Is what I'm hearing you say. And I would defer to Iris to say, like, what are one or two things that a parent should think about before they're sharing their kids' lives online? So are there things, like Iris, that you recommend to parents or those who are caregivers for, or have kids that are not theirs in their lives too?
Yeah. That are safer to keep private.
Yeah. So actually, when you were talking about when you asked how long, how fast acting sextortion is, in Braden's particular case, it was 27 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And his friends had made a capstone project, and it was called 27 minutes because that's how long it took for him. And one of the sad parts about that case that then, kind of came to the making of Braden's Law is that, one, it makes it so that there is immunity for the individual, for the minor who has sent the content. Because technically when we talk about CSAM, even if a child has a nude photo of themselves and it's saved on their phone, for whatever reason, if that comes to light or law enforcement finds it, technically legally they could get in trouble for it. And in that case, so like that's something that these individuals who targeted Brayden, like they were like, oh, your life is over, you're going to get in trouble. And so that's that manipulation tactic. And so the other sad part of that too was that his parents didn't know that that was the reason as to why he took his life, because it was until a year later where, you know, like, I mean, the FBI was like, you know, asking for like subpoenas to have access to his phone, and it just was not happening. And so the law makes it, this law makes it so that within 30 days, if the minor is deceased, that the guardians will have access to the phone and information. Yeah. I think of James Woods, who is another youth from Streetsboro, Ohio. Now, James, you know, his was like, it took 19 hours. His parents made a foundation in his name called the Do It for James Foundation. And they're amazing. James's dad really talks about like how the dynamic of like how they raise their son. Like when you talk about like, oh, things to be safe, right? They had open conversations with their son about safety, and they were very much involved of like knowing who his friends were, and like, you know, if he played video games, like they were aware, like they all actually shared the same passcode to enter each other's phones. Like there was no secrets, right?
They did everything
right.
They
did everything right. They did everything right as parents. And I think that, like, I'm not a parent, but I know that that is like one of the scariest things, where it's like you can do all the things right, but there are people out there that are just so good and manipulative, so good at being manipulative and inserting themselves in someone's life. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do is just have those conversations with kids, really educate them, really kind of letting them know that, hey, you know, like if someone messages you online, you know, like if there's someone who you don't know, you know, or they claim to know you and they look attractive, they look appealing to you, like, yeah, it's human nature to feel more likely to want to respond to that. But also I think listening to the tone. Some of the kids, when I'm presenting and I ask them like, what do you find is like something that kind of like throws the vibe off, and you're like,
there's the red
I don't
flag.
know. Yeah. Like what kind of indicators are like, what's happening? And they're like, oh, like, first of all, like if it's like a really older person, like an older guy, or if they want me to, like, if they, message them like on Snapchat or Instagram that they want to go to another messaging app. They're like, no, like that's kind of weird. Or, if they ask to meet up, if they have like one photo and like no followers, like, you know, like, so right. Those are some things, right?
Those are like the obvious things
those are like the obvious things. And so, I think also because when kids are young, like babies, I actually was on Instagram, and when we talk about like the power of AI, like if you post a photo of your child online, like somebody can take that photo and put it in AI and have it generate a video, right? Like that is something that happens. And I think,
personal question.
Yeah.
If we're sharing photos, I will commonly, if I want to share a photo of my son, I don't share him publicly. I will put an emoji over his face. Is that safe, or can that even be taken and used?
I think if it's like an emoji over their face, it's okay, because especially if like you enlarge it and there's like really no room for them to really
try to like duplicate, like don't do like half of the face where then they could try to duplicate the other half and make it realistic.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a safe option for people to do if they want to share their children. They could use emojis. I like to use the emoji sunglasses so that it just looks like he's wearing sunglasses. I feel like it looks a little bit more normal versus like, oh, I'm trying to hide his face in a way. I feel like this is a topic that we could talk about all of the dangers on and on and on, but I want to make sure that we get to what are things that we can can be doing in our daily lives. What are applicable things? And going back to the aesthetics industry as well, something that I've noticed in practice is I may have somebody come in and we do laser hair removal. And it might be that there's a man coming in and he's saying, oh, my wife wants to have full body hair removal and this is what she's doing. And she has no say in what it is. He's dictating when her appointments are. He's dictating every piece of it. And it could even be vice versa. We've even had wives do that with their husbands where they bring them in and say, he's getting Botox or he's getting hair removal to his back. And they're dictating this and it's very forceful. And you can tell that it's not a healthy relationship. What are safe ways to bring up to those patients, to check in with them where we are doing good and not harming? Because I think that that's something that I worry about is what is, and I will give an example of this. I actually got injectables done and I was in a relationship and went to a grocery store and I had a woman walk up to me when I was with my partner and put her hand on the cart and say, honey, did he hit you? Are you okay? And I had just had threads done. That was it. I had bruises from my threads, but we were underneath the fluorescent lights. And I just thought in that situation, I'm glad that she said something, but also in her abrasiveness and the way that she did that, that was actually more dangerous for me if I was in an abusive situation. And so that's something that in practice, I do always think, what's a way where I can check in, but it's not doing more harm than good. It's keeping that door open, or it's letting them know that they, I'm a safe place to come back to, even if it's a couple appointments down the road. What's a safe tactic for us to use in practice?
I think something that you mentioned where you're like, you kind of hit up on like, oh, like, like you could tell, you can sense that something is not okay, or like, and so I think it's like, because you are in an industry where you're very personable and it's like customer service and it's like you're building rapport, right? And so something too, it's like if the client, if you ask questions and they're not answering any of it, and it's always like the other person, if the person doesn't want to leave the room, right? You're like, oh, it's hard because it's like, I would say this, get as much information as much as like a description, the dynamic of what made you uncomfortable, and you can report that to the human trafficking hotline. We have like a national hotline, which is for resources, and then we have the state hotline, which you would be talking to law enforcement. And especially if it's a client that you've seen over, multiple times, like, and being a lookout of like, oh, like,
almost like documenting the timeline,
Yes.
just like we would. I mean, our doctors do that. I think that that's something that we are medical providers, or even if you're not in a medical aesthetics practice, but maybe you're a standalone esthetician and you have your own suite, you are able to document just like you would with what the treatment is. You can document the timelines and keep that. And hopefully you will never need that, but at least you have that you can share. What does that look like if we reach out to the hotline? Do they call the people? Like, how do they do that check-ins? Does that cause a bigger problem?
So it's also interesting that you brought up like with the medical field, because at least in the medical field, like you'd be like, hey, like we need you to, just we need a sample of this, and then like in the bathroom they'll have like a sign, or they'll put like, if you feel like you're not safe, like write your name in red, right, like on a cup or something,
Right.
right. So there's like more room in that. When you are, like within the beauty industry, and like you're kind of, again, if you suspect something, you kind of feel something's off, it's like asking the personable questions like, oh, like, are you from here? Or like, how did you guys meet? And really kind of seeing like if their questions, if their answers are like, if they sound scripted, or like if they don't know, like they don't have really knowledge of like where they live with the area. But when you call the hotline, so when you call the state hotline, you're speaking with like law enforcement, and you're putting in that tip. And so they're going to ask you, they basically ask you just a series of questions. Like they can be like, okay, well, what about this do you suspect, is trafficking?
Right.
And so you can let them know. And then because they have experience with working these cases, they'll ask even more like, well, what did the guy look like? Were there any tattoos or any visible marks? Or, they might even ask what kind of services they asked to have, and was the client did the client seem scared? Did the client make eye contact? Like, they ask a series of questions, and they don't contact those individuals.
Okay, it's more just a timeline that they're gathering to help if
yes,
it escalates further.
Yeah, they're gathering that information to see, like, okay, so it could also be like, I'm trying to think. Like,
what would be the case if you think, because, okay, again, in a previous life, I worked for the Walt Disney Company, and one of the very first days of training, we had to go through human trafficking training. And one of the things that we were taught was, you would think that didn't happen at Disney World particularly, or that traffickers would bring, whether it's children or other adults, to Disney World, but it's because you don't suspect it, that's actually a great place for them to go. And so whether it was in the resorts or whether that was in the actual theme parks, we were taught what to look for in that case. And then we were given instructions on, depending on the escalation status, exactly what step to take, whether it is calling 911 or calling security, doing both at the same time, whether it's just putting a report in so that there's, a track record of it. What would you say if it's at the point of, I think I need to call the police, this is escalated to that point? Is that a call the hotline? Is that a call 911? What's the best option?
Yeah, like if it's like immediate danger, like you see, like it's violent, it's like happening in real time. You
think if they leave, their life is in danger type level,
call
or they're going to be
911.
moved.
Yeah, call 911, and you can even say like, "Hey, I suspect that this is trafficking." This is like very violent. I feel like if you. Like, you can always I'm sure, like, you can request, like, hey, like, this is escalated really badly. If you can send police over, but maybe, like, no sirens, or, like, because I'm really afraid, like, really stressed that, like, I'm really afraid that, like, if,
I'm afraid for my safety and the victim.
Yeah. And if they hear, like, they might be alerted, and then, like, they might flee. And so I think if it's immediate danger, call 911. If it's, you suspect it, or there's something that you see even within your community, you can call the hotline and kind of provide that information, those details, because that is, they'll even ask like their name, or they'll follow up, and they can also provide you next steps into how it is, how, like, okay, next time maybe try this, or maybe you can contact us again, or contact this person, like they'll give you
the next steps.
Yeah, they give you next steps.
Yeah. Alisha, knowing both sides of this conversation, what are things that you would say are pieces of advice that we as practice owners and providers can put into play into our businesses?
This is a great question, because this is the empowerment piece that you're giving your listeners here. And we're learning from Iris, but I think there's more to learn. So the first thing I would encourage everybody listening to this episode on is like, well, learn more, because this is just a small piece of time, a moment in time. And it is a big conversation that's being had. So I would give everybody 3 places to go to learn more about exploitation. One is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC is for short. They have a whole section on their website. They're not just looking for kids who have disappeared. They actually have a whole section about trafficking on their website. They also have a resource tied to what you talked about with online exploitation, and maybe somebody sent a photo and it wasn't to a perpetrator of sextortion, but it was just to somebody else that they regret. They actually have this program that's called Take It Down, and you can get it actually removed from the internet. So great resource there. Yeah. The Tim Tebow Foundation as well is completely dedicated to helping end human trafficking in many ways, through legislature, through survivor support, through education and awareness. That's another resource. And the other one is International Justice Mission. So I always give 3. And I know you're going to find out where to connect with us. So I'm always sharing this type of content on my socials. So that's step 1. This is the first part of education. Learn more. Also have these conversations about what you learned. Talk about it with others in your workplace. You can go and invite an organization like Grace Haven to come and do a team awareness session. I'm sure if if Beyond Skin calls you and says, can you talk to our staff? We want to learn more. You would say, absolutely. I don't know any organization that's dedicated to education and or survivor support that would say no to that. So that's what you can do as well, right? It starts there because then you're going to learn a little bit more. And then you can put a plan in place for your business to say, if we see something, what do we do? Learning from the experts. So you could almost have like a crisis plan should you have somebody come in that you might be worried about with exploitation, and have that crisis plan for your team. So that would be another thing, right? That's part of learning. The second piece, so that's in your business. The second piece is in your community, that once you learn more and you find that you have a fire for this and a passion like I have had over the last 6 years, make it a cause that you want to support as a business and get out there and do cause marketing. I'm a very big proponent of using causes to market, not just as a way to make money, but as a way to align for the greater good of something that is important to your heart. So maybe cause marketing will be, about trafficking and exploitation. And you can then make that a part of your business model and your marketing plan to be able to spread awareness, spread education. And I want to talk about really quickly in that cause marketing as providers in aesthetics, giving this incredible care that can make people feel so great about themselves, right? Not just that somebody might be sent there to receive services that would help them be exploited, but people like Iris have compassion fatigue. People who serve in this area of survivor support or law enforcement hear about things that would give us nightmares.
Yeah.
And they do it not for the applause. They do it not because they are championing themselves in a sense of status and self. They do it because they know that they have been called to this work. And if you can give some love back to the staff or law enforcement and reach out into your community, and maybe you're going to have a special day that you bring them in and you just love on them and they get services and you thank them for what they're doing. So that's another piece that you can do in your business. And then my third is bigger than the business, but as business leaders, you're leaders in your community. You might be involved with the chamber. You might be involved with other organizations. So you understand the power of connectivity and networking, but also look at what's happening legislatively in your area, in your state. I've been very active in understanding what's going on in the laws because I want the laws to head in the direction to be able to help prevent human trafficking, punish the perpetrators, and help to support the survivors. So legislature is another piece. As leaders in business that you can step into, look up what bills are coming up in human trafficking. I've been very involved in the bills in California. Human trafficking, from a buyer's perspective, buying a minor just last year became a felony in California.
Insane.
Yes. So there are laws that are happening all the time that are going before. There are people dedicated to this that are lobbying, find out, and you don't have to go and present and speak. You can just share and write a letter to your representative that's actually part of voting on those things. And then look at the bigger picture federally. I mentioned Tim Tebow. And so as a business owner, a leader, you can rally around and get people galvanized. I love galvanizing people, as getting them to do good with you, to look at what they're doing on the federal level. There is a Renewed Hope Act right now in front of Congress. Tim Tebow presented earlier in March of 2026 to timestamp this episode about the importance of this. And this is actually what we talked about online. So there's a database of tens of thousands of children who are being exploited through imagery and video content. And they have the technology and resources to actually identify these children. But they need the funding and they need the federal support to do more in that area. So look at it as, what are you doing in your home too? What you're consuming in content, what you're participating, what conversations you're having with friends, families, and neighbors, what you're doing in your business with your team, get them empowered, equipped, have a plan, reach out, do good, connect with organizations locally. Every town has an organization that is somehow involved in the area of anti-human trafficking or survivor support, and then go bigger. Get into the legislature and see how, if you're not going to do the work, at least you can help those that are doing that work. So those are my three kind of areas that I would encourage you to take a next step in.
I love that, because I think that sometimes it seems so overwhelming of like, I can't be the person that's doing this, but what we can do is support those warriors that are out there doing it. And we're still a part of that ripple. I think that should be the goal for all of us, is to just be a part of that ripple effect. Even if it's one little drop, it's going to go somewhere, and we're going to support the next person who's going to take it somewhere. So be a part of this mission. It is easy to get involved and learn more. Really quick, before we wrap up this episode, I know, Alisha, you are also doing work with tattoo removal for survivors. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. That's where God married my passion project in the area of anti-human trafficking and the day job I love so much. So it is not a known fact that many traffickers will brand their victims, more often not like little children, but those that might be teenagers or adults, as a sign of ownership. And that's through tattooing. And when we say branding, that's the type of brand. It's a tattoo. It's not like they're actually physically doing a branding with a hot iron or anything, but it's a mark. And this mark is a sign of ownership, property, and it is a psychological manipulation to those who have been branded, like they're owned their property. And when people get out of that life, and as part of their redemption, to no longer carry that brand visibly on their body is, in some survivors' journey, meaningful to help them find that sense of freedom. And that was no longer me and now. And when I learned about 1 out of every 2 victims of human trafficking are branded, I was shocked. And then that's
a big stack.
Yeah, that's a big stack. And we learned about that because we actually did the research on that in a needs and impact study that I did, coming alongside the past president, Paul Friedman, who is a dermatologist in Houston, Texas, for the ASLMS. So that's the American Society of Laser Surgery Medicine. We got connected through that could be a whole other podcast of divine intervention, but we got connected because I was actually going to start a nonprofit of my own. And somebody said, no, there's a president that wants to make this his president's philanthropic initiative. And so him with his associate, Dr. Emily Guo, and a dermatologist, Elizabeth Cream, who has become a friend through this, we formed an arm of New Beginnings Branding Tattoo Removal that allows ASLMS members to say, yes, I want to offer pro bono services to survivors of human trafficking to have these tattoos laser removed, if that is their choice. But we didn't just say that, we actually equipped them. Then we put together a trauma-informed care course for the providers, because trauma-informed care is very important. I heard Iris mention it earlier. Trauma-informed care is how do you have an interaction or exchange with somebody who has been exploited or gone through trauma in a way that's not going to re-trigger them. It's going to make them feel safe and allowed to be able to continue that relationship in a healthy way of whatever you're offering them. And so we put together
training that we could get as providers as well to learn how to communicate.
Yeah. So it's very much of like,
sorry to interrupt you. I just feel like I want to jump on that while we are on it.
No, yeah. It's very, we have like for like in our presentations, it's like, well, how do you approach someone? Right. And like, what are the ground rules? And it's like, like make sure you're like in a calm environment and, respecting the person's like space. Like, okay, like if you ask questions, you're like, I don't want to talk about this, or kind of following their lead. So like we do have like how to interact with someone. So something that we stress often is kind of like being that safe adult for anyone, right? Whether it's an adult or a child, but primarily because I work with kids. But, one of the biggest things, it's like when a kid tells you something, believe them. Don't doubt them. Don't say, are you sure? Or, did you
Is that exactly how that happened?
Or did you take that the wrong way? Or like maybe they didn't mean to do that, because when a child, when youth open up and they say something, and then as soon as you plant that seed of doubt, then that guard goes up, and it's like
a psychological rewire.
Yes. But that is something that we have within our training of like how to interact and like, why it's it's essential to kind of create a calm space or like
okay, so as practice owners and providers, we can reach out and get that training. I love that. I'm not sure if I threw you off of your point there. So that is training that is involved with that.
Yeah, so that's through ASLMS. So we put together a curriculum for that, and also a referral network. So here we look at when somebody, based on working with the experts, so there was an organization called NTSA, which is the National Trafficking Shelter Alliance. They have now been adopted into Atlas Free, which is a network of, and I don't know if you guys are involved with Atlas Free or at all, but it is a network of survivor restoration programs that we worked with so that we could do this needs and impact study to say, number one, is there a need for branding tattoo removal? And number two, would it have an impact those on a scale of 1 being like low to no impact to 10 being major impact, for both of those, the needs and impact were above 9. So, and this was based on those who care and work with survivors every day. But we also know that not everybody's in a program. And because somebody might need to be in a journey and be guided to that journey, they worked out and we worked out a way to have a referral service from a service provider caring for a survivor of human trafficking to connect with a New Beginnings pro bono laser expert to have their tattoos removed. So we kind of checked all the boxes to look at what is the appropriate way that a healthcare provider could have a very safe experience for the survivor to go through this and have their branding tattoo removed, and for the staff, because you talked about that too. So if somebody is in a care program, they're more likely to be in a safer environment. Usually it's likely out of the physical geography of where they've been trafficked. They're usually either out of state or out of town. But there's a lot of things that are to consider. So it's beautiful to have been a part of that with ASLMS. And I will say the American Academy of Dermatology in parallel is doing a lot of work with dermatologists, because think about it, they see skin, they treat skin disorders, diseases, and they just see a lot of skin, on how to also potentially identify potential victims of human trafficking based on what Iris talked about as some of the signs, and also creating a database of branding tattoos. So there is some great organizations within the aesthetic and dermatology space that is doing some of the work for us. And to any of your listeners, I'm happy to talk about this all day long. They can message me and be able to learn what I've done, because I can be that bridge between stepping into something new and being a part of it and bringing it into your business, your home, or your community.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Ladies, thank you so much for all of your knowledge today. Before we go, Iris, I love to ask my guests all the exact same question. Alisha has actually answered this question for everybody out there. You can go back to season 1, episode 3. Alisha was actually my first guest outside of Beyond Skin Aesthetics. So go back to that episode and you can listen to her response. But for you, Iris, what is something that is beautiful to you?
I really had to think about this one. I was like, there's so many things. I don't think there's just one thing. I think there's many things, but one of my favorite things that I find beautiful are like lotus flowers and what they symbolize, because a lot of times when it comes to, we often hear about like butterflies and like the metamorphosis of like becoming anew, especially when you've experienced trauma, exploitation. But with lotus flowers, they grow in dark, murky, dirty waters, right? And it's like they're growing through all of that, like they see the light. There is hope, right? And so it's like they grow through the darkness, they grow through the things that are not pretty to eventually this beautiful flower, right? Like, and I feel that it's easier and it's natural to kind of dwell on the bad experiences, yes, like some people have some really terrible trauma, but to reflect on, wow, like I didn't just survive this, but I'm thriving, or like I didn't give up during that process of, when I was living this hard time, there were still beautiful moments and they were still things. So I feel like for me, like lotus flowers really represent that for me.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that so much. What a beautiful way to end this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Bright Side of Beauty podcast. Everyone, if you would love to connect with my lovely guests, I will put all of their details down in the show notes. But before we go, Iris and I do have some information that we want to share with you. First off, will you tell us the hotline numbers for everyone to be able to have as a reference?
Yes. So you can call 1-888-373-7888, or you can text BEFREE. And it is a 24/7 toll-free confidential hotline. That's for the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And I believe, I don't know the state one, the state one, but if you Google Ohio
or your state's hotline, it will pop
up
right up for you. And then Grace Haven does have an event on June 12th where you can rappel for a cause. You can rappel off of the side of a building, and I would love to do this with you. So if you're listening to this and you are local to Columbus, let's jump off of a building together for a cause. Any last thoughts? Any other big things that are going on in ways that we can connect and support Grace Haven?
Well, there's also this other event that is being held by Eldorado's Food and Spirits in Graceland. And this is on Saturday, May 9th, and it's gonna be performances by and it will be supporting Grace Haven. It'll support like the work that we do. You can always reach out to us if you would like to take a tour and learn more about Grace Haven, volunteering, how to get involved, but
Educational opportunities as well.
Opportunities for sure. And also you can always reach out to us if you go to gracehavenohio.org, you can send us an email if you want a consultation. Like if you have someone in your life that you suspect something, like it might be trafficking, or you're not sure, like especially if it's a youth and you kind of want to see if we can provide services, please reach out, give us an email, and we're happy to set up a phone call, a meeting, and kind of discuss this youth in your life and like how we can help and what kind of services can be provided.
I love that. All right, friends, let's do good and make a difference. I'll see you next week on the Bright Side of Beauty podcast.